Hi you guys, my name is Roberta Peel. I'm from Oregon Trail Silver and I'm also an admin on Let's Make Jewelry, and this month we are going to do sweat soldering flat pieces together for our monthly challenge. So I have a couple of pot or pancake die cutouts. This is supposed to be a potion bottle, but you know, if you have an imagination like mine, I think it would be nice and appropriate with a little mason jar. So anyhow, you don't have to use pot or pancake dies to cut your pieces out. You can always hand saw them. You can do this on a bigger scale. You can do this silver on silver, copper, brass, whatever on silver, on brass. It doesn't really matter as long as it's one of those metals that you can solder together. So you'll see that I have my tripod out here, and I have a little broken crucible over here as a counterweight because I like to keep my screen hanging over. Anyhow, not a lot of people like to use the tripods with the steel screens because the steel is a heat sink. Well, copper is a heat sink too. But you can do this if you have titanium clips. You can do this on a charcoal block if you're really good at like heating up your charcoal block to heat the underside. You know, you can do that too. Anyhow, so all we're gonna do, and the purpose behind sweat soldering, by the way, is whenever you're trying to solder two pieces together, one of the things that you're going to find is going to be a problem is that when the solder bubbles, or when the flux bubbles, then the solder itself is going to bubble away. Your pieces that you're trying to solder together are going to shift. So it gets kind of ugly. Anyhow, so in this instance, sweat soldering is probably going to be one of our best bets. Alright? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use a very liberal amount of flux. And don't be shy about it. And just kind of spread it as evenly as you can, particularly where your piece is going to be getting soldered on. And you don't want to put so much on that, you know, it won't let the solder sink down. But so I'm going to do the front side of the bottom piece and the back side of the top piece. And you really want to make sure you get it all over on the top piece, because your flux is your catalyst. So anywhere that you really want your solder to flow, you definitely want to have it fluxed. Alright, so to cut down on the bubbling of that flux, we're going to go ahead and heat it from underneath, and then just kind of get that flux to bubble up until it turns glassy. Once it turns glassy, your flux isn't going to bubble anymore. Alright, and I'm using, this is Handy Flux. You know, use your preferred flux. There we go. And then the other thing that I'm using as well, this is just a MAP gas torch on a Benzomatic plumber's torch tip. So the reason why I'm using MAP gas is because between copper itself being a heat sink and steel being a heat sink, if you don't know what a heat sink is, it's essentially something that will suck in your heat and put it out faster than you can put it in most times. Not always, but most of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and heat from the bottom, probably flip it over the top, and just glass that flux over. See how it bubbles? Now it's turning white. There we go. Now, most of the time, you guys know I like to use my my pick solder, but I'm not going to do that this time. Make sure that's on a good flat piece right there so that it doesn't fall off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some hard solder, and because I know a lot of you beginners like to use your little tweezers and do it the hard way. You know, pick soldering is really kind of hard to pick up on at first, but it's really, once you get used to it, you'll find that you prefer it. But because I know most of you guys like to use tweezers and just drop your chips on, then we're going to do it that way today. And we like to keep these more beginner level than anything, and you notice that I'm being really generous with my solder as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop quite a few pieces on, and again, this is hard solder. That's why I don't like using tweezers. So we're just going to go ahead and drop our solder on. One more piece, I think will do it. If I can get it on there. Gee whiz. It's really not liking me today. There we go. Alright. So remember not to touch your metal when it's pissed off at you. And make sure that you have your flux. Oops, lost one. Make sure that you have your flux rearranged. This is another reason why I like pig soldering. Pretty close to the edges, but also some in the middle. And this is probably the hardest part. There we go. Now I'm going to grab my torch, and if I try to heat this up from the very top, it's just going to blow my solder off. So I'm going to heat it up from the bottom until the flux itself turns glassy again, and then I'm going to stop again. Okay, so I'm going to heat it up until the flux turns glassy. I'm going to go ahead and heat from the top until the solder just barely starts to flow. Once that happens, I'm going to take the torch away. There we go. Then we're going to pull this back over where I want it and flip it over. Hello. Sometimes it's a good idea to wait until it's cooled off a little bit more, because if it's hot enough and glassy, then the flux causes it to adhere, and then it kind of becomes a little bit of a mess. Anyhow, just line it up however you want it to be. There we go. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat it up again from the bottom, and then I'm going to flip over to the top. Now most of the time you're going to see a flash go around the sides, letting you know that your solder is flown. If you don't see that, just heat it up until it turns probably a decent pink. Right, you know, for silver it would be right before the melting point. And then flip it over to the top and just continue to heat it. Don't forget your heat control. Heat control is really super duper important, because if you see it really starting, especially with this copper, you see it really starting to turn bright red, you really got to back your torch off. Alright? So we're going to zoom in a little. Heat from the bottom. Now, did you see how it kind of sunk down? It sort of dropped down. That let you know that the solder underneath is flown. And I'll quench it up a little bit. With silver, you want to give it a second before you actually quench it. And what we're looking for, right here on the side, let's see if we can get it to refocus. Anyhow, what we're looking for right here on the side is to make sure everything is flush. Alright? And then you can go ahead and pickle and add to it, whatever you want to do. So that is sweat soldering. And we're going to go ahead and do probably one of my stamps for this particular challenge. I'll go ahead and post a picture of the stamp plus a picture of these guys when I'm done. I didn't do a great job of lining it up, but when you do it this way, however you put the top piece on, it's going to stay there. Okay, so even though it's not perfectly lined up on this right here, that was my error. That wasn't, you know, a result of the flux bubbling or anything like that. That is sweat soldering. So I hope you guys have fun with this challenge. Again, you can do this on a larger scale. I have a cuff bracelet I'll share a picture of that I had actually done this on. Mind your heat control. If you're doing silver on silver, you want to make sure that it doesn't actually melt. Okay, you guys? So have fun. Happy creating.